I think it's not that it's not accurate. It's just it's reflecting God's heart differently. Because what he was trying, I think what he was basically, I mean, there's all sorts of different theories, obviously. For me, God wasn't saying that he wanted child sacrifice, obviously, because in other parts of the Bible, he definitely says it's totally forbidden. And it doesn't actually indicate God was for sacrifice at all, but it was their uh, perspective. I mean, Abraham was brought up in an idolatrous setting. You know, his father was an idol maker. He was brought up in that setting, and therefore the whole thing of sacrifice and whatever was part of that idolatrous system because they sacrificed to idols for fertility, for favor, and everything else. So God had to introduce himself to Abraham out of a culture which is totally alien and foreign. So I believe part of the thing was in their culture, sacrifice was normal, and actually child sacrifice was normal. But what God was basically doing was testing Abraham to trust him, but then indicating that it wasn't acceptable for God to sacrifice a son, and there was figuratively a substitute. Now, if you go forward, in a sense, that's exactly what happened with Jesus giving himself as a substitute or an offering to take our place, die our death, and all of that. Now, some people would say from the law of precedent, because Abraham was willing to do it, then God was able to reciprocate. But actually, I think, to be honest, it's just the reality that God was trying to break him out of a system of a mindset that I don't think he knew God at the depth at that point in his journey. And I think God was showing him something, but with a view of, in a sense, from God's perspective, Jesus, the Lamb, was slain before the foundation of the world, to ensure that there would be restored relationship. But it's quite, you know, when you look at Old Testament, you know, whose perspective is it written from? You know, whose understanding is it written from? You know, for me, the Old Testament, we're not in the Old Testament, we're in the New Covenant. And therefore, I don't think we need either the Old Covenant or the New from it, or the New Testament as a book, because even that was written in a transition. And it sort of led out of the transition into, hey, well, now we have a relationship with God where we're a new covenant, new temple. The Holy Spirit dwells in us. God dwells in us. We're a new wineskin. We don't need an old model wineskin, and we don't need a transitionary model wineskin either. So, you know, ultimately, if we have a relationship with God in which we're intimate and we can talk to him face to face, why do we want another intermediary? You know, it's a mediator, and the Bible has become a mediator for a lot of Christians. They only think of God speaking to them through the Bible. And, you know, and even if they do believe in God speaking to them directly, it's always got to be, well, it's got to line up with the Bible. Well, that's putting a huge restriction on God to say it has to line up with the Bible, when actually a lot of the Bible is full of things which actually don't align up with God, full stop. You know, so why would he align with something like a sacrificial system, which in the New Testament, it very clearly says sacrifices and offerings I didn't require. And the prophets prophesied that he never required sacrifices and offerings, but they did. You know, they carried the idols out of Egypt around with them for 40 years in the wilderness. They had a golden calf. That comes back to the religious system that came out of the knowledge of the true good and evil from the very beginning. Even when Cain and Abel offered sacrifices or offerings, in a sense, God didn't tell them to do it. So where did it come from? You know, it came from the knowledge that they had developed, from the guilt that they felt from what Adam and Eve had done, which was their lost identity. They had lost their identity even at that early stage, and were looking to try and get it back in some way by offering something to appease God. which is the problem of appeasement. God needs appeasing because he's angry with us. He's not angry with us. He was never angry with them in the first place. You know, even when they messed up, he didn't turn his back on them and go and hide from them. They hid from him. And then he went and found them in their hidden state and offered them restoration, which they rejected in a sense because they didn't follow the path of the knowledge of the tree of life path. They followed the knowledge of the tree, even though the tree of life was open, but they would have had to have gone through the fiery sword, which would have been there's fire that purifies what we've done. So we're going to be purified. So they had to own up to what they'd done. But they never owned up, did they? They just blamed each other and then blamed the devil. So they never took responsibility for what they did and then changed their minds about it and go and engage with the fire to purify them and restore them. And if they'd done that, then their offspring wouldn't have carried, you know, that, because the previous offspring were born before all that, and then Cain and Abel wouldn't have been born with that lost identity, because that lost identity would have been restored. Hi everyone, we're starting a Patreon page and we would like to invite you to partner with us. You can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/freedomarc. Partner with us in taking the message of God's unconditional love, limitless grace, triumphant mercy to a bigger global audience.